Thank you. So what I'd like to talk a little bit about is data. And we heard a lot of people today talk about clinical trials. I didn't really hear a lot of people talk about patient data from registries and real world data, which has become so much more important as we think about the value of data as it contributes to drug approvals. So how do we think about this, and what can we do in the context of repurposing drugs with respect to real world data? Many people have their own interpretation, but as we probably know, that over the last 2 years, the regulators, particularly the FDA and EMA, have taken really, I would say, a much more palatable lens to real world data, given though that the quality of the data has to be of high quality. And I'm going to describe that a little bit. So in the drug development process, as we think about it, there are many stakeholders. Many of us are in the room today: patients and advocacy groups, pharma and biotech, key opinion leaders and researchers. Now, in my former life, I was a professor of medicine and computer science. And the historic way that we were measured on our success is how many papers we published and how many grants we actually put out. Nobody ever gave us a gold star for collaborating, and thus you have a situation where everybody is hiding data in their pocket. I'm obviously exaggerating, but the reality is that there is so much data around the world, and most of it itself is not being repurposed because we're keeping it to ourselves. And so as we think about what each of us are doing, what we have done at Pulse is built a platform that allows us to really think about data, thinking about common data elements first that are common across diseases, and then disease-specific variables that are actually part of a particular disease, but leveraging a single environment to be able to really understand the manifestation of diseases. So what does that have to do with drug repurposing? Let's think of it this way. I think I may have skipped, oops, sorry. When we think about the trials that have failed, it could be because of power calculations. It could be because of some of the data that were not adequate. I remember about 5 years ago, we were working in a disease, in a rare pediatric neurological condition, and 15 of the patients, out of the 15, only 5 were accepted by the regulator, in part because 10 of the patients didn't have high quality data. And so when you think about that and the cost to the patient, the way that we think about real world data and how it helps with drug repurposing is really that when you have a clinical trial in a particular disease, the data that are used for that particular trial or in that disease are important, not just if you pass or you get approved, but also if you fail. And failure doesn't mean the end of the road. Failure really means that you use those data adequately to better understand why something happened. But remember, a single molecule today is not just used for a single disease. And so you learn alongside a clinical trial by collecting real world data and using those data then to better inform your thesis around R&D in terms of the molecule itself. So think about real world data as the perfect opportunity to really generate evidence. And so generating evidence takes a lot of work. And really what it first means is that we all have to work together. We talk about that a lot, but none of us really do it that well. But having a governance structure, having a transparent way to share data so that everybody understands that any data that they're sharing, they're not losing. It's just going into a composite pile that can ultimately be used to support drug development. And so here, we know that observational studies that are done sort of in situ or alone don't necessarily result in a trial, but having observational studies that ultimately are alongside a clinical trial provide a lot of value. Today we see many companies who are building new drugs, who are building a pipeline and repurposing drugs, but they're not going to just always repurpose for one particular disease. So is there a way that we can think about many of these different types of diseases being able to be served by a single source of data or multiple sources of data, including patient-reported outcome measurements? So our innovation, I would say, is not a huge innovation, but it is in terms of thinking about sharing data by mapping the data. So our data are mapped to OMOP, which is an ODESI standard or an ontology that requires that data are structured. And those structured data then can be read into clinical trial speak, which is CDISC, and other data forms. So ultimately, the message is do data right And I really don't want to be the person who gets the bell. So I'm going to stop now. Thank you so much.